Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back from that long Yes. Welcome back from that long and expected lunch session. Just briefly, we're having a short photo moment. Less than a minute. Thank you. I believe you've captured that. Okay, thank you so much. Thank you so much. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. I hope you are energized and ready for our next sessions. We have quite in plenty. We are sorry for the delay, but we're going to try as much as possible to manage time effectively here with you so that we can fulfill our program today. Ladies and gentlemen, next on our program is the keynote speech. Thank you. Next on our program is the keynote speech, and immediately after that we shall go in for the parallel sessions that will happen in the breakout rooms. You'll be guided accordingly to where exactly you're supposed to be. But allow me to introduce to you Professor Patrick Okori. He's an agricultural scientist and academic leader with expertise in plant breeding, research, innovation, and higher education development. He has driven the development and commercialization for more than 30 improved crop varieties, which are widely adopted across East and Southern Africa. He was part of the team that championed agriculture technologies that reach over 50,000 households annually. A thought leader in agriculture development, Prof. Okori has shaped strategies for numerous regional and global institutions. He holds a PhD from the Swedish University of Agricultural Sciences. Ladies and gentlemen, let's join our hands and welcome Professor Patrick Okori. Thank you so much.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I want to welcome you also to Uganda in my own small way as a citizen of this country and as an alumnus of this great illustrious university. I want to congratulate ARUA on your 10th anniversary. 10 years is not a short time, it's a long time, and especially when you are working in a continent where sometimes things don't work, to provide solutions the way you're doing is appreciated. So thank you very much and congratulations upon your 10-year anniversary. Furthermore, congratulations also for your 5th anniversary of the meeting you're having now. This is the 5th session. Again, we would like to congratulate you on behalf of RUFORUM, which is a network of universities across Africa that specialize in graduate training, research, and development in agriculture and related areas. We want to bring our greetings and also congratulate you for this meeting. I also congratulate the leadership of ARUA and the membership thereof for the good work you're doing for this continent, Africa. As you may be aware, sometime last year, the second 10-year investment plan, the STEEP as it is called, for delivering the Africa we want, was published. And in it, there's something called moonshots. I think there are 7 of them. And the moonshots have got targets. And one of them is number 6, which talks about the science capacity we need to drive our continent forward. And a meeting like this is aimed to help us to think about what we can do on the realization of the STEEP achievement. So congratulations and welcome to Uganda. I want to take this time to talk to you, to share with you some thoughts about an important sector, the agriculture, which feeds the people of this continent and really is home to about 60% of the close to just over 1 billion people we have on this continent. And why is it important? RUFORUM, the organization I lead, is a network of universities that is 20 years old, founded about by Makerere University and others. At that time, the countries were emerging from war in East and Southern Africa. And the idea was to strengthen the capacity of those universities to foster innovations that are responsive to demands of the agricultural and allied sectors through high-quality education and the production of relevant science products and services. It was felt at that time that African universities were delinked from the broader development processes and practices. And so RUFORUM was created at that time for that. Moreover, the level of graduate training that was taking place in sub-Saharan Africa was pretty low, and especially in East and Southern Africa. It was not uncommon to hear of 2 or 3 PhD graduations in 3 or 4 years. And sometimes there would be no PhD graduation at all, something that has turned around drastically. And so we were created for that purpose. This is our footprint. We work with the African Union. We supported through our member universities. Some of you are here. We led part of the effort of drafting of the Comprehensive Africa Agricultural Development Program, the one that was refreshed this year in Africa, which is going to guide investments in this sector for the next 10 years. We've also been part of the ESTI, the Education Science Technology Initiative, and especially the Science Technology Strategy for Africa. And we are also supporting the AUC on the Committee of 10 Heads of State that really present the agenda for science, technology, and innovation to the African Union at the highest policy level. We work with different agencies, the European Union. I sit, for example, representing universities on the European Union, Africa Union high-level policy dialogue on food, nutrition, security, and sustainable agriculture, FNSSA. And that's the one which appropriates money for agriculture and related things, that investments that are made by the EU to Africa. So we sit there to make your case, we're your voice. We work with Asia as well through different development agencies. JICA, we work with China through the Belt and Road Initiative, China Agriculture University, and many others. And then, of course, we have a lot of strategic partners. Many of you are in this room or online, and I will not go so much into the detail, but suffice to say that we work with different networks of universities involved all the way from basic to applied, and all kinds of agencies also that help to drive development. The top one is the one I want you to pay attention to. So in 2002, we had a meeting in Abidjan in Ivory Coast, Cote d'Ivoire. And at that time, the president of the African Union had requested that he wanted to see African universities and the international research centers, the bank itself, and then the extension and advisory services and the sub-regional organizations all gelling and speaking as one voice. And so we worked together to put together this network we call highest levels of investment in agricultural research and development. Now, I won't go into detail, but our investments are generally integrated to ensure that financing and engagement, especially with private sector, are core. in most of our continent, countries in our continent, there's a big link between universities and the private sector. And so science coming out of your work rarely drives the types of investments that take place in the private sector as compared to the North. And our job is to make sure that that happens. The second is that because of the asymmetry in investments in science, technology, and innovation across the continent, and especially shifting away from agriculture to agri-food systems, which brings in different actors, we need to think very differently. And so ours is to make sure that we're enhancing productivity of the agri-food systems, we're enhancing resilience because of the different shocks and challenges. But most importantly, Africa cannot afford to follow the same development path that has been followed by Brazil, that was followed by Argentina, or South America and North America, that has basically destroyed the environment and caused all kinds of challenges that I'm going to talk about today. So we must pursue a different pathway in terms of agricultural growth and development. But last and not least, I'll stop there, is about rebalancing the human resource pyramid. So after the structural adjustment programs of the 1980s and the 90s and early 2000, depending on which region of Africa, many of our institutions of higher learning were converted into universities. And that distorted the human resource capital of this continent, to the extent that in many places when you go, the last mile delivery agencies are not there. And so you have PhDs, you have master's degrees, you sometimes have a lot of masters, you don't have technicians. And many scientists are struggling even with the technical capability. So ours is to argue with the universities to rethink about how we can contribute to rebalancing the human resource capital of this continent, well aware that you need many PhDs, you need many more MSCs, and you need tens of thousands of masters and much more of development actors if you're going to drive development of a country. Now, the question then is, how can you make agriculture work for 13 million smallholder farmers? That's roughly what you have in sub-Saharan Africa. And this young woman in northern Uganda here is growing upland rice, which was developed by the late Professor Monty Jones, and from West Africa. It's now all over Africa. And how can you help such a person to move out of poverty? So 60% of the farmers in our continent are actually smallholders. And if you go and look at that number critically, you'll again find that roughly about 55% of them are youth and women. They do not have access to factors of production. And yet they're expected to feed and drive the economies of our country. They're excluded of our continent. They're excluded in so many ways. And this study here, published just last year by the African Development Bank, UNDP, and AUC, it just gives you a picture of how far we are from delivering on those SDG targets. As you can see, the shades on those inside tend from red to orange or yellow, if you like. There are only 2 green spots that are there and on food security. And that is because we are even importing food to try to stabilize prices. But food production itself is down. And that means we need to think of new ways of doing things. We were shocked by the war in Ukraine, the Russia-Ukraine war. I didn't realize how closely linked we are to the global food system, but in fact, we are highly integrated. About a third of what you eat today is not produced in this country. And so that tells you how we are interlinked and how the food systems globally are very well connected to one another. The rice you ate might actually have come from Pakistan or Vietnam. Now, the question is, how do you then fit and make that system function? This young woman here is one of our young graduates. She graduated about 2 years ago. She has a master's degree, and she's called Zura, and she has a shop. She offers digital extension services. She works with blind people, has developed an app for teaching and talking to them. And as you can see there, she's even producing mushrooms besides selling all kinds of agrochemicals. So this is the type of graduate that we're hoping to produce, because as you know, This continent produces 12 million young people ready to enter the job market annually, 12 million, but it can only do 3 million jobs. So somehow we can no longer continue graduating people and talking happily of how many graduates were produced. As the one Minister of Education challenged me, he said, "You are creating problems for me when you tell me how many graduates you produce. Tell me how many of them are creating jobs and wealth, and I will listen to you." And so this type of student is the one we want to produce, but we must produce them differently. Now, this is a publication that came out this month, actually. It's an update on the planetary boundaries by the Potsdam Institute, and it talks a little bit on Stockholm Resilience Center. What you see is that this heat map is mostly red. Out of the 9 planetary boundaries that we must pay attention to, we have actually breached 7 of them. And out of these 7, 6 of them are directly related to agriculture. So you may not be able to see all of them, but you have one on the top there talking about novel entities, plastics. And I was reading a publication recently talking about some of us having microplastics in our bloodstream and in many places. Climate change is another one due to many types of greenhouse gases that we are producing and how it is having its compounding effects on the environment. Biosphere integrity. You all know now, perhaps, that the Congo Basin is the only functioning lung of the world now. The one in Indonesia is no longer functioning fully, and the one in Brazil was messed up as well. So it's only in the Congo Basin so far that is capturing and sequestering carbon effectively the way it should, and it must be protected. Then the land systems, agriculture and others are degrading and changing a lot of this. There's so much concrete and iron roofs everywhere, but we're destroying our own biodiversity and leaving nothing for posterity. Fresh water, mostly due to eutrophication and coming from nitrogen and phosphorus. All these are destroying our water bodies because of agriculture, and certainly acidification because of very compounding impacts of industrialization. So while Africa has set this agenda of industrializing itself, it needs to be aware that there are challenges related with how it has happened. And so, and the people in this room must inform that science. Now, this is just some limited evidence to show you why that is necessary. So this is from the Lancet Commission on Health, Sustainable and Just Food Systems. It's also an October issue this month. And what you see are those long bars there. And the top one there is on root crops. And you can see how much root crops we are consuming actually across the continent. You guessed it right. Most of it is associated with humid and subhumid regions, and we're destroying that environment. In the middle, you have a blob there. That is beef and meat products and poultry. And you can see how their consumption is also driving up production of greenhouse gases. But I just put these things on the side here to show you how agri-food systems are directly, the food we eat is directly impacting our environment and eroding our future. So like I talked about biosphere integrity, land systems, I talked about geochemical flows, I talked about the water system, but I didn't mention that the climate boundary and the ocean acidification are additional ones that we are impacting upon. And so these are things we need to think about when we are designing how agriculture should drive development. In 2023, FAO published this report, and it is based really on the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction. And you can see that when you look at that framework, 49% of the risks that we face today are mostly due to drought. And that is associated clearly with the planetary boundaries that we have pushed to the edge. And we have to do something about that. You can see that threats from natural disasters like floods, like Storm Melissa, Hurricane Melissa, that is just crossed over in the Caribbean, they play a very small part. They're just doing something like 6% threat to humanity. But everyone is talking about Hurricane Melissa. No one is talking about why we need to cut down the carbon that we are putting into the environment. This is just to show you another study that has been published very recently again by the African Development Bank. And the main message here is that Africa is making progress, really, but our productivity levels, unbeknown to us, are actually in the 1960s level. So we're about 1.2 billion people today, but our productivity is compared to a time when Africa's population was just about 300 million. And that means we cannot feed whoever we have now if we continue doing things the way we're doing. Look at our cereal productivity. It's at the same level where it used to be in 2015. And then we have bad indices. We are stunting our young people, which means we are stunting the future brains of Africa. And we should not be surprised that they will not be innovative, because a child's brain beyond the age of 8, nothing much you can do about that. And there's heavy stunting of the under 5s. In fact, it has gone up by just about 10%. Well, we have beautiful, good statistics for the young women. There's a bit of response to that. It has reduced. And the number of malnourished people has increased by about 150%. And so you have a small sector. My message is you have a tiny sector, and this tiny sector must be able to feed a very dynamic society in a very dynamic world that we're living in. It's no longer the same world that we grew on. The technology has changed, and many things need to be thought about to make agriculture work for us. I won't go over this, but the main message here is that our productivity is really pretty low, and especially how technology can influence growth and development is pretty low. This is just to show you our fertilizer use. When you compare us with the rest of the developing world, we are doing 8 kilograms per hectare. If I compare with India, which does 148 kilograms per hectare, or compare that with Brazil, which is over 400, you can understand why we import soybean. And you can understand why landed maize and landed soybean is actually cheaper in Mombasa than maize that is grown in Uganda here, because of what we do. But we don't want to work that way. We must work differently. And finally, just to share this, is that this woman here in the middle, whatever name you want to give her, must be connected, but she's highly integrated, disconnected from different systems she needs to work with. She needs to work with research on one arm. She needs to work with the markets on the other hand. She needs to work with herself and cooperatives on the other. They're all delinked, and I think that digital solutions can actually provide that. As you had your lunch or picked up your water, it's important to realize that many of what you're eating or we are using today, actually, when you process food, you increase its usability. But the challenge you have is also you lose its nutrient content if it's not well managed. Now, as Africa is urbanizing with almost 40% to 50% of our population living in urban centers by 2040, we need to think carefully. How will we produce in a sustainable way to meet a completely urbanizing population that is globally integrated? How are we going to do that? And moreover, we must also produce for global markets. Well aware that Africa has 60% of the world's remaining land to increase production. But should we work and use up all that land? I'm arguing the answer is no. This is just one of the reports that has come up from the biannual reviews, which are done to assess how we are making progress towards delivery of the CAADP. And you can see that sub-Saharan Africa, that blue line in the middle is the African continent. You can see that Southern Africa and Northern Africa are making the least investments in growing the agriculture. East Africa is trying. Central Africa is a little bit above average. And so there's this variation on what the governments are putting in to make agriculture work for its people. If you look at our human capital, this is why your meeting here is very important. So in Africa, you have the number of scientists per million is about 128 scientists per million. That's an aggregate number for medical people. Just name it, PhD holders per million. It's 198. If you compare that with the average of the European Union, which is 4,700, I had somebody talking about why we should end importing things from Europe. It's not going to happen if you're having such a big ratio. 4,700 to 100 and what? And 28. And this gives you a picture. So South Africa, for example, I'm a plant breeder, that's why I'm using this. South Africa has 53 maize breeders. You don't just need human capital, and that's why this conference must think about getting that human capital to be effectively engaged in development processes and practice. But you need a bigger ecosystem. You see, South Africa, with 53 breeders, produces 236 maize varieties. I want you to look at another country, Ethiopia, which has more PhD holders, breeders, 74. But can you see how many varieties it produces? 12. So you can see that the agricultural development in South Africa is clearly superior to that of Ethiopia, not because of human capital, but because there are other things you need to make that system to work. My own country here has 12 scientists, PhD plant breeders. The numbers have even gone down now. And we only have 26 maize varieties. Most of these varieties, by the way, have been released over the last 10 years or so. And so this disconnect between human capital development on one hand and societal needs on the other hand, and support by the broader ecosystem of science, technology, and innovation is something that this conference must pay attention to it. If we just pay attention to PhDs, we don't think about the demand, and we don't draw in the other ecosystem actors, it's obvious that we will remain where we are. So my net message here is that the atmosphere that we're living in, the environment, is drastically changed. Digital technologies need to be harnessed to integrate the different subsystems, and that has been demonstrated in a way. We still have challenges with shocks, and we must work towards building resistance to that. But we can't continue copying. We must develop science for Africa in Africa, and that's why having universities playing a bigger role in the national innovation systems is essential. But we should also pay attention on healthier planet and healthier diets. We can't continue doing things the way we did. So thinking circular and thinking bioeconomy is really important. All that will not happen if we are just paying attention on production. We must pay attention on productivity, especially the total factor productivity, the extent to which we can turn factors of production into valuable investment returns. And there are many options here. I won't go into them. I'm going to come back to them. This is a young man, a graduate of this university that I was listening to. He's developed a soil science kit that can help farmers to assess soil fertility wherever they are. And he uses GPS and Earth observation systems, plus other things he does. So that can help him to use both remote tools to address critical problems. I thought that this is the type of young people we want to work with. It's a group of them. They studied here in this university. And now we are supporting this young group of people to scale up their technologies to solve problems in society, just like for Zura. And so to your topic here, how will everything we have talked about, making agriculture work for the rural people, drive development across the continent? I want to, as I head towards the end, just to mention that it is possible, but it needs to develop Africa's way. And I won't go into this, but just suffice to say that artificial intelligence is seen as a hope. 2 years ago, there was a publication which said 37% of the jobs would be lost because of artificial intelligence, if the jobs as we know them today. I was reading a report this morning from the World Economic Forum, and actually it does show the opposite, that we're going to get 78 million more jobs added because of artificial intelligence. But that means we have to change the way we are training. We have to change the way we are thinking. The main message here is that artificial intelligence, especially the generative form of artificial intelligence, which people have been talking a lot about here using ChatGPT and others, where you use machine learning and other processes, deep learning, etc., to learn certain patterns on your data and manufacture new solutions. That type of science is becoming part of the order of the day. And it is standard practice. As I was told by some leader in this, he said, as a university, don't spend too much time on generative artificial intelligence. Think more about general artificial intelligence, because that is what Microsoft and others are putting millions of dollars on, and you don't have that money and the effort to compete with them. So my argument is that we would rather go for generative artificial intelligence, which is a position where machines think and act like human beings. They have very close to human behavior. They can be able to meet the so-called Turing test, that machines behave and act like human beings. That is the frontier, and I think that's where Africa should be spending its attention on. What forms of artificial intelligence do we need? We need that type. I think we need a generative one because it's more complex to handle the type of situation we have. The data sets we have are too limited and too thin to help to make meaningful judgment out of most of the data across different disciplines in Africa, agriculture inclusive. And so thinking more about about the general artificial intelligence is the way to go. But it is still something and its nascent stages. And the question to us is, how well prepared are our universities to begin moving into that sphere of general artificial intelligence, getting machines that think like human beings? I won't go into this, but just to let you know that in agriculture, there are a lot of applications, and they go from predictive analytics. We do this a lot in crop improvement. These days, you can shrink development of a variety from 8 years that I studied. You can these days do them in 4.5 years, even 5 years. You can use it for predicting diseases. And like I said, accelerated crop improvement. You can use it for farmer advisory services, but you need data for that. And most of this is really the so-called generative artificial intelligence. You can actually train robots to do certain things for you. Earth observations. But Earth observations in agriculture are a huge problem because of the huge variability in our farming systems. In Africa, it's a place where within 5 square kilometers, the farming system has already changed and you can no longer learn much from it. These are still just examples. I won't go into them, but they are going on across Africa here. Just suffice it to say that a lot of AI use currently on the continent in agriculture is in crop improvement, and some of you are not plant breeders, but they help you to do all these types of things. You can be able to do trait discovery. You can be able to speed up your breeding cycles from 8 years. You can cut it down even by 50%. You can be able to assess your phenotypes, like I'm going to show you very briefly. You can be able, it helps you to design much more efficient systems of handling your data and so on and so forth. And this is just a standard tool, but this is what we're doing in this university. We're using drones to help us to phenotype cowpea. And this is what the schema looks like. You have a drone flying over, and then you have systems that can be able to translate that into data that you can use to go and pinpoint which parent you have in a large population, over 2,000, things of that nature. And this is just an experiment that is going on. And we have this type of work going on in the continent. And this is just to show you that using artificial intelligence, you can actually be able to have pretty high levels of certain traits you are interested in, and be able to use them to run your system. And finally, you can use AI as well. These are models that we are trying to develop for handling, integrating extension and education and all of them, to get them to work and talk to one another. And these are systems that we're developing in RUFORUM. This is something else that we're doing with extension workers. And importantly, we're working with some of our universities on how you can link education, research, extension to work together. And so finally, as I close, I wanted just to mention that it is important to realize that agriculture is really how you're going to move people out of poverty. because if you increase productivity by about by 1%, you will be able to move 2 million people out of poverty. It's now been demonstrated to be at least 2 to 4 times more effective moving people out of poverty. But we must do that extremely differently. I wanted to close by saying that how we develop, it must be different. The Green Revolution was a product of genetics and crop management. But we must implement something else. In the 1990s, the world began implementing a new type of genetics. It was called biotechnology. And that type of revolution was called a doubly green revolution. I am arguing that we need a triply green revolution where digitization combined with advanced genetics and advanced agronomy and circularity drive improvement in agricultural systems. That way we'll get the 1%, that way we'll be able to move millions out of poverty, and I thank you for your kind attention. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Patrick Okori. Another round of applause for our professor. Yes, for that wonderful keynote address. Due to challenges with time, we're not going to have the Q&A session with him. So ladies and gentlemen, allow me at this moment invite Professor Janice to shortly announce the winner from the raffle in less than a minute.